Welcome to Chautauqua People. My guest today is Dr. Jim Simarco. He is from a multi-generation Chautauqua family and a retired orthopedic surgeon. Jim is a native of New Jersey, graduated from Dartmouth Medical School at Tulane with residency and fellowship at Case Western Reserve. He served in the Public Health Service. The bulk of his career was spent in Cincinnati, where he focused upon clinical research, writing 35 chapters and publishing more than 60 articles. Jim, how did your family first come to Chautauqua?
Well, my grandmother had died in Lodi, New Jersey. It was an immigrant family. And my grandfather called the 7 children. She died at childbirth, and along with the girl she was carrying, baby. The 7 children they had at the time were called into a room after the funeral, burial, and whatnot. And Papa told them what happened to them. He had to get life in order. He said the oldest would go into his business, which was contracting. The second oldest was Frances, and she would quit school and raise the other 6, or raise all of them. And Ben would, and his brother Marinus, would stay in school and make something of themselves and go out and be successful. Philip was very young, and Rosalie very young, and my mother was 18 months old. So over 17 years they had 7 children. What happened was Miss Marl Rohn, born in Hamburg, Germany, with a very difficult childhood, worked her way into house cleaning and domestic work, immigrated to England and then to the United States, to Newark, New Jersey. By that time she had learned reserved English, the proper, I call it BBC type of English, and was very clear about the way she spoke and the way she dressed. She talked herself through immigration as a single woman, which in those days would have been difficult on Ellis Island. You needed to be married. And from that point on, she was hired by a dress shop and was bored with that instantly, picked up a book on politeness and etiquette in America by an American, stopped and went to Montclair College, State College, and became Miss Marl Rohn. Miss Marl Rohn then went into teaching, and her prime student, her pride and joy, was Frances. When Frances came home after she told her teacher that that was the last day of school, Miss Marl Rohn put on her street clothes, a nice hat, took the trolley in Lodi, and went to their apartment, walked up the stairs, knocked on the door, went in, gave her sympathy, because in those days, in grieving, you didn't have visitors. Scared the children to death, asked the father if she could speak to him in private. They went into the dining room, closed the sliding doors. The children slid up and, in terror, putting their ears to the doors, while a discussion, very politely, in Sicilian and in English took place, after which the English slipped into Hochdeutsch, and the Sicilian slipped into the way you would talk to a laborer. The temper rose, and my grandfather did not realize at the time just exactly how focused this woman was. She beat him hands down and told him that he would not make a slave of this girl, and said that she is going back to school, by the way, along with her brothers, and by the way, this summer she'll be coming to Chautauqua with me.
Whoa.
That's exactly what my grandfather said. Whoa, what is that? Well, it wasn't quite that summer. My Aunt Frances waited till she was 21, came of age. They took the train from Passaic, New Jersey, to Jamestown, the boat up the lake, the donkey cart from the Miller Bell Tower up Vincent, and were ensconced in the Ashland on the 3rd floor, where they spent the next 2 weeks with the likes of preachers, teachers, vacationers, and, as she would say, conoscenti. At that point, after that, it was she and Miss Roan became very close. Miss Roan became never married. She took on the family. Between the two of them, they sent them all to school, college, and beyond. And when she died, she was loved, honored, and she is essentially the beginning of our time at Chautauqua. It started in 1915, and as of today, we have about, I think, 5 or 6 generations. We have a couple at the house now.
Goodness.
Really young ones.
Goodness. Now, how did you become interested in music?
Well, I always liked music. Even when my mother tells me, even when I was a baby, I'd pull myself up and sing the tunes in front of an old Philco radio, the old stand-up type radios that were there. One time, my mother lost me up at Chautauqua one summer, and she was terrified because she did not know how to swim, and she thought I'd go down to the lake. I was 5 years old. And as she's walking back, she went down to the colonnade and looked, and post office. On the way back, she looks down and she sees me sitting in the front row of the amphitheater. And the orchestra was rehearsing. And a conductor by the name of Franco Oturo walks to the front of the stage and just stops the orchestra, walks up and says, "It's all right, madam, he comes here all the time." And I had the ability, some say talent, of hearing a tune, any tune basically, and being able to repeat it, sometimes with multiple parts. And by the time I was 10 years old, really had a pretty good orchestral repertoire on board. The Columbus Boy Choir came to Chautauqua in 1943. I came as a baby in 1941. I used to watch them all the time and was fascinated by the fact that they could do an opera on stage. They had 2 concerts a summer and stayed in the old Signal Corps barracks on the South End after World War II began, and they were pulled out. They were a touring professional choir, and when I saw them, or my mother saw them, that they were going to do a concert in Dumont, New Jersey, she said to me, do you want to try out for the choir? I said, sure. And it beats homework. And so we went to the concert, and I went up, and Donald Bryant, the pianist, Juilliard trained, said, "Oh, sing a song." I said, "Well, I don't know any. I have a lot of them in my head, but I don't know any." But they had just sung last in their encores a Scottish folk song, "Coming Through the Rye." So I said, "Well, I can sing "Coming Through the Rye." And I sang it verbatim. I've never heard it before, but I sang it verbatim. And Herbert Hoffman, who was the director, goes over and they counsel with Don Bryant, and they offered me a scholarship, and I could begin whenever they could do it. And that January I started, and then other things began to happen.
Now, what part did you play or sing?
Actually, I was there for 2 weeks when I was chosen by the composer, Giancarlo Menotti, to do the premiere performance of Amal and the Night Visitors.
Really?
Which debuted Christmas Eve, the following 1951, on NBC. The one story, I did not actually do the debut. That was done by Chet Allen, a friend of mine, also a year older than I, because by the time I was chosen, which was January 51, and into the middle of rehearsals in October of 51, I'd grown 2 inches and was taller than Rosemary Kuhlman, the mother, when I sat on her lap for a duet. And the decision was made to get a shorter person.
So you got scratched.
I became that. I got scratched for the performance, but then did the next 4 years as a mold with City Center and other companies around the country.
What parts were you singing the next 4 years?
Well, we sang with the choir, boy choir. We sang in obviously several languages, particularly liturgical stuff for the first part of the concert. Then operas in English, translated into English. It would have been the Bastien and Bastien of Mozart, or Der Apotheker of Haydn. These are short one-act operas. And then the final would be show tunes, and basically show tunes and medleys and things, and Negro spirituals. I know them all now, still.
Really? Now, did you ever perform as a child at Chautauqua then, with these groups?
Well, of course, with the Columbus Boy Choir, we did 2 concerts a summer.
Right.
And I was with the boy choir until my voice changed at the age 14. That would be 8 or 10 concerts. Plus, I was up here, and I knew pretty much what was going on. I played bit parts in operas at the time, and also was with the Cleveland Repertory Theater, which was up here. We're talking a long time ago. But and was there for a while. And then I moved on to, obviously, high school and college.
Yeah, and now those operas were performed in Norton Hall?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's when I guess they still do that.
Now, you came to Chautauqua, you performed, you hit the big time at Chautauqua if you made it into Norton Hall. How was your family received at Chautauqua during those years?
Well, it was a difficult time during the war, and my Uncle Charlie was married to my Aunt Rosalie. They purchased a place on 39, a lot, but the war came and he could not build until post-war. So he built a cottage on the South Overlook at that time, which stood until about 8 years ago when we had to replace it with a building which would actually stand up. It was built in '46 with Army surplus materials, and you knew when winter was coming because the wind blew through the back of the house and out the front. So we finally had to take care of that.
Right. So you replaced it.
Yes.
Now, Sicilian blood in the family.
Yes.
They're a person of religious beliefs. Where did the family go to Mass?
Oh, that's at the old movie theater.
That's Higgins Hall, I think.
Is it Higgins? Yes, I guess so.
Yeah. And was that filled, or what was it like at the time?
Well, it was a movie theater.
Yeah.
It was I think it was an assembly hall of some sort.
Right.
And on Sunday they held Mass there, and that's where I went in the morning. Now, of course, we go to Mass at the Hall of Philosophy, and which is more convenient since I live in the South Overlook.
Yeah. In that service at noon or whatever, is it?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful experience.
Right. Friday, they have Mass both Friday and, rather Saturday afternoon and Sunday.
Right. My Catholic friends police me up at least once a season and say, come join us here.
Well, it has Mass. They also, the Episcopal Chapel,
right,
which we associate with it and for various reasons, that we have, there is a Mass said there daily in the morning.
Now, let's switch gears here. How did you make the transition from Chautauqua music to orthopedics?
Well, you'd think that'd be difficult, but it's not difficult. I really had spent 4 years on the road, literally, traveled to at least 100 cities,
Right.
and with various concerts and whatnot. And I think I was tired, and I just kind of wanted to go home. My father understood that,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, that's fine. And so I went back. I finished high school and went on to college. And when I was in college, I had a call from my Uncle Charles, who was a surgeon. And he said, well, Jimmy boy, when are you coming down? And I said, I don't, well, what do you mean, Uncle Charlie? He said, well, we have a place for you here at Tulane. I said, well, I'm at Dartmouth. He said, no, we're talking medical school. And we had talked before about it. And the following year, I went to Tulane and started there and finished up in '65.
And then did the postgraduate work in Cleveland.
Well, after an
Residence.
internship and then in service,
Right.
when I came out, I went to Case Western Reserve, interviewed around the country. I was in the service, so you could go to your interviews, space available, which was very convenient. But you had to wait 8 hours for the airplane going to that city.
Right. Right. So that worked out.
Yes.
Now let's again switch gears here. And your career had a focus of research in orthopedics along the way, treatment. How was it like? What was it like doing a residency? We hear all these horror stories about maltreatment of residents.
Well, being a teacher of residents
Yeah, or being a resident yourself.
and being a resident myself. No, I don't think so. I never found that to be the case.
Yeah.
Charles H. Herndon was from Texas. I was stationed in Texas. It was a phone call almost to have me go there. He welcomed all of his residents. He's extremely fair and even-minded man, very bright. One of the very first to do total hip replacements.
Right.
I actually studied with John Charnley in Oswestry and hired Mary Daunt, a plasticista, as they say, who came back with him and ran his operating room. He did scoliosis on children and total hips. He focused on that and was an excellent trainer, an excellent teacher. I've never heard him raise his voice except once, only once,
Right.
and that's when he made the error.
Now, how was surgery changed? That's like on hips during the years you've been affiliated with medicine.
Right. During my training, and before, in medical school, hips were operated on regularly. Boston was a hip center of the world, one of them, that and places in Europe. Certain designs were ball and socket designs, and they were for hip fractures, and then the so-called cup arthroplasty, which was basically a cap over the end of the short end, the proximal end of the thigh bone. But the patient had to stay in bed with multiple traction on the bed, moving the legs gently for many, many weeks, and then a slow ambulation, and then walk with a sometimes grotesque limp, but walking as opposed to sitting. So they became ambulatory as opposed to sedentary. So they back up. And the surgeons who did this were excellent. They're very good at it. But the total hip changed all that. Total hip is the most important change in orthopedics as a specialty in itself, because it allowed one to get up and walk pain-free. You changed both sides of the hip, the ball and the socket. In the old days, they were, and still are, some of them, cemented in with a type of plastic, which would allow the secure joint, ball and socket, to work. Over the years, it has changed tremendously. There are three things which are required for a joint replacement. One is a choice of materials, whether it's stainless steel or titanium or some other form of amalgam. The second thing is design, to design it correctly. And that changed dramatically along with the materials, including ceramics and high-density polyethylene, all the engineering things. By the way, enter bioengineering. And then securing the bone would be the, you have design, and then instrumentation and skills to put it in. So you have the operation and you have the materials to do it, all in a state of flux over a period of many years, so that the early ones would last 3 to 5 years, or they were destined to. But now, 30 years is not uncommon at all.
So, as a young physician, then it would have been, you would counsel patients and say 3 to 5 years is sort of the planning figure, and now it's decades.
Yes.
And that's...
Yes.
Yes.
And the idea of, I was fortunate enough in biomechanics to work with Victor H. Frankl, not the psychologist, but the orthopedic surgeon trained in Sweden, who did the analysis, of which I was part of, for joint motion. At the time, they were planning on landing on the moon. But these 3 fellows in the Apollo had to sit there for 10 days inside that capsule. So they had to have the precise movement of every joint in the body so that they would know how far to put the instrumentation, the levers, the sticks, all the things so they could access and be in, of course, a spacesuit. That led to the examination of it under in the medical field with research as to movement and strength.
Wow.
Okay, with and without gravity. That then led to movement, the design and development of instruments and implants, like a knee. How much motion is in the knee? And how far will it bend? And by the way, how much do you have to bend your knee in order to get out of a chair? Well, 95 degrees, everybody knows that. So we learned that, and there was a lot of study done. Victor wrote a book on biomechanics of the human, and I was fortunate to do some of the readings on it, and later on do the analysis, joint centers and rotation in the lower extremities, in the ankle particularly. And I felt very proud of that. That was pioneering work. With respect to, as time went on, the techniques of surgery changed. So not only were the materials changing, not only the design, not only the instrumentation, but now the techniques, so that now it's not uncommon for someone to have a total joint replacement and leave the hospital the same day.
Goodness.
Yes.
And before this was months in traction.
Oh, it would be, it goes from the 50s to the 70s or late 70s. I would say from about 3 months to down to, by the 80s it would have been 5 days, 8 days. And then after that, it's come down even sooner.
So what do people say? They fix their hips and they stand up the same day?
Oh, yeah, they stand up the same day. We spoke about that. I had a friend tell me I was about to have my knee replaced, which I do have a right knee replacement. And my next door neighbor up here at Chautauqua said to me, he happened to be chief of orthopedics at the Cleveland Clinic and a good friend for 50 years before. Unfortunately, he's passed now. But he said, Jim, what is the first word a patient says with a total knee when he gets up and stands on it for the first time? I said, what is that? He says, ah.
Fantastic.
For people who need total knees, I think they will understand that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I got another item we talked about before, and I was astounded. Tell me a little bit about infection control. And you had a time frame of probably century and a half.
Right.
And how that has changed.
Well, the development of care really goes back a long way. One would be control of bleeding with tourniquets in the 16th century. But what always stuck in my mind, one of my heroes, and he's long dead by centuries and I never knew him, his name is Semmelweis. And he is credited for saving mother and baby's lives at time of delivery of children. And he noticed that a fellow named Lister in England realized that when he saw patients, he thought that hands should be very clean. And he didn't think soap would do the job. So he used chemicals, a phenol type of chemical. And Semmelweis picked up on the fact that in the summertime, in his hospital, and hospitals were new then, that the death rate, excuse me, from delivery of babies rose dramatically in the summertime. So much so that it could be up to 1 in 5, or maybe 1 in 10. And he looked and saw what was happening, because if you had the baby at home, the chances of dying with that, other than other aspects, but not from infection, or not from sickness, postpartum sickness they called it, would be very low. But if you went to a hospital where it had doctors available and care, and they put you in a bed, a lot of them didn't have beds in those days, then you got sick and died at a much higher rate. So he said, what is going on? He watched the eye. They all went on a schedule in the morning. First, at 6 o'clock, they would show up in the dissection lab in the morgue, and they would dissect cadavers. And that's where they learned the gross anatomy. And then they would go and they would make rounds on the ward, and they would go and they visit each woman who delivered and examine her. And then they would do it the next day and the next day. The system was daily. And with the temperatures like we have here at Chautauqua in the summer, Vienna is not that much different in summer heat, many of these women were becoming infected. They get sepsis. It's later on called postpartum sepsis, and die. And he said, why don't we just wash the hands before we touch the mother? And they said, oh, you can't do that. But he said, when he was just a young buckaroo starting out, so he put these basins of phenol or type of drug, liquid, and washed his hands. And in 1 month, the mortality rate drops well above almost 90%.
Wow.
And he says, oh my gosh, what's happened? The next month, 95%. And you can see it because, of course, they register deaths on a graph. And you can see it just go bump, bump, bump in August, in September. And he presented this to his associates. And of course, things being what they were, when the chief surgeon and the head of the hospital were basically ran the world, they thought that he was not a very honest doctor, that his patients were living. And eventually he lost his job. He could not get another job. The word was out that this guy was a charlatan. And eventually he was committed. He lost his mind, was committed to an insane asylum, that's what they called it in those days, and died there. But he did write it up, and it got into print. And as time went on, he became known as the guardian of motherhood.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Goodness. And so that procedure then was spread throughout the surgical range of experiences, how to clean up and
Yeah, it's a long story, but I think it bears. This is early 19th century.
Right.
washing hands. How did Garfield die? Garfield died because the message of washing your hands and cleaning them with phenol had not really been common when Garfield was shot. So his wound was probed with the finger, unwashed hand, every day. And there's a lot of discussion on that, of course, and that was 1880. This I'm talking about occurred in 1850. And what was going on in Paris? Well, someone was looking at bacteria and finally came up with an idea called the germ theory. And the germ theory took off in the 80s and 90s, 1880s, 80s, 90s. And this German fellow, a researcher, decided that he'd look closer at the White Death, called the White Death, tuberculosis. And no one could figure out what it was. They thought it might be a bacteria, but they didn't know what it was. He developed a dye. The Industrial Revolution, everything's coming together. The Industrial Revolution is inventing dyes for clothing, whatnot. And one of those dyes, these are the diazo dyes. One of those dyes, which was not that, but of that nature, stained this bacterium called the tuberculosis. And with that, they had a bug. Now, how do you treat it? See. So now you have infection. We'll just fast forward a little bit to salvarsan and all the other arsenic drugs and things for the treatment of syphilis, which for 400 years ran rampant over most of the world.
Right.
And that was...
And then it was taken care of. Now let's switch gears a moment.
Sure.
What's probably been the most significant discovery on your watch?
On my watch, well, besides the total joint replacements, without question.
Yeah.
Hips, knees, ankles, shoulders, and spine surgery. Magnificent things done with spine surgery. Very difficult. Pediatric surgery, all the areas. We're talking about orthopedics here. Those are the things. And all of the specialties moved, particularly after the Second World War. It's absolutely amazing what happened, because everything went on hold in the Second World War. Fortunately, penicillin, discovered in 1929 by Fleming, Englishman. By the way, he was a failed orthopedic surgeon.
He was.
Yes, yeah, he was. He tried to, I guess he was a mediocre surgeon and couldn't get a practice going, and he loved the laboratory. And he found that with agar plates, which is what they grow bacteria on by then, we're fast forwarding well beyond the discovery of bacteria now. He went on vacation for 10 days, came back, opened the refrigerator door, and his culture plates, several of them, had an odd spot of, it looked like a mold in the center, it was greenish, and a clear ring around it, and he was growing bacteria. And it was not just one, it was several. So I started to look at that and isolated it, and that became penicillin.
Goodness.
And it was amazing. But prior to that time, sulfa drugs were in.
Yeah.
Chemicals.
Yeah. I got about only 10 hours worth of stuff to discuss with you. I want to hit a couple more points here.
Sure.
We're over for time, but the crew always indulges me when we have a good conversation.
Sure.
What have we learned from this COVID experience?
A number of things. That all epidemiology, I did spend some time in epidemiology in medical school, in field work. Epidemiology, like anything else in medicine, has a timeline. When you first see something which is new, as Einstein said, and I can quote it, but paraphrase it, that the treatments and success for treatment for a disease problem on a particular new problem will not work. You need to think newly for new problems. Well, it turns out that COVID was new in the way of its speed and transfer of it, but also the fact that it's also a pandemic, and the world is full of pandemics over the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Black Death is one of the most notable. But that you can make an error in the evaluation of data. You can not collect the data from the right places or from the right patients. You first have to define the disease process. And it's a common flu, but it wasn't a common flu.
That's right.
And so that Fauci, who worked very hard, with all other things being equal, to get to the end of it, get to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
Once this moves into an area out of medicine, then there are other things which occur, and they are beyond medical, really beyond medical control. It is now, diseases have a life, you know. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so do plagues, and so does leprosy. And I believe in many of the flus that we get in the summer and the winter time, you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
And it's not because everybody in the world is vaccinated every year for several of them.
That's it. One question I'd love to end with,
Sure.
and shape this to everybody who's here. So let's say a young Chautauquan comes to you and expresses an interest in having a career in orthopedics. What advice would you offer?
Well, I would say it's nice to have religion. Nobody is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're terrified of operating on someone because you're going to make a mistake, you fail both ends. You fail the patient, you fail yourself. You have to be able to read and to focus. I tell my patients and I tell my fellows that I treated and students that it's not a game, it's real life. It's not easy. There's a lot of non-medical issues which arise that you have to deal with. There's a lot of economic issues that you have to deal with. And there are a lot of personal patient issues that you have to deal with. None of them are separate. They are intertwined. It helps for a doctor to be a good listener. In fact, I'm a tertiary specialist, and you can tell a patient with 3 or 4 years of starting several treatments, failing, changing doctors, and so on. And if you listen to this over time, I tell my fellows, said, you'll have the diagnosis before you touch them.
Wow.
You'll find out how the process developed from a fall or an injury. How the patients are very good. Patients are very good historians. So they'll tell you how it happened. I fell this way, and so on and so forth. So if you have a little bit of biomechanics, and all orthopedic surgeons do,
Mm-hmm.
you can divine a bit the nature of the fracture. And x-rays, of course, and CTs, and all the other things that are available. You have to keep up on it. You can't let it slide.
Big continuing education requirement.
Absolutely. They are, yes. Surgeons and physicians are recertified now, all specialties, and I think that's good. I think it's good.
Indeed. We are out of time, and this has been great fun.
Wow.
And I'm certain viewers will be thankful for sharing your insights.
Well, I'm pleased to have
And
been
do
able
come
to.
back.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.